It's Ash from SuperVideos back for another video for The Last of Us on HBO. This is going to be my episode review for Season 1, Episode 2, which was called Infected. Stay tuned, we'll be right back with this review. Alright, as always, before we dive into it, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. With that said, let's dive right into it. So first thing I want to say is overall, I think that this was a pretty solid episode, and I definitely enjoyed it all the way through. Even though the first episode was much longer than this second episode, I feel like this second episode packed a lot more things in it, and everything that we saw carried a lot more weight than the first episode. So overall, I think this was a pretty good episode, and I feel like one of the key reasons why this episode was a lot more smoother than the first episode for me is because of the 20-year time jump. Obviously, that was something that we needed in the first episode, but it was also something that slowed the episode down, and then it had to build up the tension and build up the story from the beginning in a way. So because of that, I feel like this episode was a lot more smoother. At least I can say I enjoyed this episode a lot more than the first episode. But let's start with the opening minutes. Obviously, we saw the origin of the Cordyceps fungus. We saw that it originated from Indonesia. We saw the Indonesian scientist or the university professor, and we saw a lot of background information as far as how the Cordyceps fungus infection started. Everything about the opening minutes I absolutely loved. And what I absolutely loved even more is that they explained things without spoon-feeding things to us, and they didn't really spend more time than needed on any specific subject. For example, they pretty quickly explained that the Cordyceps fungus originated in Indonesia. Obviously, the scientists were skeptical because the Cordyceps fungus doesn't infect humans, but in this case it had. So they did that kind of back and forth pretty quickly and pretty effectively. And they even did things very effectively as far as telling us that it started in a grain or flour factory, which is definitely something that goes back to what we saw in the previous episode, because obviously there was a lot of attention on the foods that Joel, Ellie, and Tommy were eating. So this kind of went back to that as well. So that was awesome. And also, if we think about it, in the first episode, there was a tease at Indonesia. They were talking about Indonesia on the radio. So everything that we saw in this episode pretty much aligned with everything that they teased already in the first episode. And I absolutely enjoyed the tension that they were building with the scientist going to that room, checking the bite and all of that. I thought that that was all effective, and it was very creepy, and it definitely was a great way to give us the origin of the Cordyceps fungus without overdoing it, keeping it simple but very creepy at the same time. Now, as far as the tendrils coming out of the mouth, which we saw in the origin story as well, I'm not a huge fan of the tendrils. I thought that maybe I should just give it some time, maybe it'll grow on me, but it's just not working for me. I feel like it's not really matching the vibes of what The Last of Us is supposed to be. So because of that, I'm not necessarily connecting that well with the tendrils particularly, which we kind of obviously saw a little bit for the origin in the opening minutes of the second episode. The other thing that I absolutely loved is how well this connected to the premiere opening minutes, or the cold open, with the scientist talking about the possibility of the Cordyceps fungus growing in humans, and how if that happens, it's the end for us. I absolutely loved it. And the other thing that I absolutely loved is how both of these two opening minutes were pretty much giving the same message. They were both telling us about how much humanity is gonna be at risk if such a thing happens. I love the comment that I read somewhere which said that both of these opening minutes told us different versions of how effed we are in this world, and I absolutely loved how that was phrased. The first episode told us that if the Cordyceps fungus grow in humans, then we lose. It's over for us. It emphasized how there's no vaccine, how there's no medicine. Similarly, in the second episode, it emphasized how there is no cure, how there is no vaccine. the only way to deal with this is to bomb the city and everyone in it to stop the spread. So I absolutely loved how both of these two episodes lined up pretty well, and how both of those kind of gave us two different perspectives that told us the same thing. What I absolutely loved, how both of these opening minutes gave us a feeling of dread, a feeling of anxieties. And that's exactly the reason why I think the origin story for the Cordyceps fungus, based on everything that we've seen in the first two episodes, is pure perfection. Putting the tendrils aspect out of it, which is something that I didn't enjoy quite as much, everything else surrounding the origin story was pure perfection. So after that, obviously we went back to the original timeline, which ended the first episode. I absolutely loved that we still saw Joel and Tess not quite believing what they're seeing and keeping an eye on Ellie and kind of not really trusting things right away, which I thought was definitely cool, and it added to the realism of the story. When it comes to the back and forth between Joel and Ellie, I absolutely loved it. I mean, some of the scenes between Joel and Ellie in this episode has got to be my favorites so far. Like Ellie mimicking, turning into an infected, twitching and everything. That was awesome. The back and forth that they had at the hotel with Ellie ringing the bell and all of that, I thought that was pretty awesome. Obviously directly from the game, but it was something that I absolutely loved. The other thing I do want to mention quickly about the back and forth between Joel and Ellie, as much as I loved the scene between the two of them, especially where they're at the hotel, I did find it a bit forced the way it happened. Like, they could have set that up in a slightly different way. It felt like it was out of nowhere, and it felt like they just wanted to do a video game scene and just get it over with. Like, it felt a little rushed. That's what I'm saying. I was hoping that they build that up a little bit more and they have a bit more back and forth between them to build their bond. Now, next thing I want to talk about is the clickers. Now, before I even talk about the clickers, one thing I do want to mention is I loved the foreshadowing for the clickers, teasing the clickers before they even show up. For example, there was a scene where Joel opened the door and the cracking of the door sounded like a clicker. So that was great foreshadowing. And also, when Joel, Ellie, and Tess were on the bridge, we heard the screams of the clickers. I absolutely loved that. And I loved how this was foreshadowing that the clickers are going to be showing up. I even loved the fact that there was one scene where Ellie actually asks if the stories are real about monsters that are like bats who can't see, but they go with sound and they attack if they hear, which is obviously the behavior that the clickers have. So that's something that was foreshadowing the clickers as well. Now, aside from the clickers, there was one scene where Ellie asks if it's true that there are monsters that explode fungus spores on you. And Tess says, I hope not. Now, that was cool because obviously it's a reference to the game. Those do exist in the game. I think they're the Shamblers, if I'm not mistaken. So I love that this was a reference to that. Now, there's two ways this could go. Either this is a way to kind of tell us that they're not actually going to do that in the TV show, and they just put this as a cool Easter egg, or they're teasing at the Shamblers actually showing up in the TV adaptation as well. So we could see either of those situations. I don't really have a preference which one. If we see the Shamblers, then great. If we don't, then it is what it is. But I would say, if for the sake of keeping things more realistic for the TV adaptation, they decided not to have the Shamblers, I'm totally fine with that. But other than that, one thing I want to mention, the atmosphere, the environment, lovely. I mean, I can't say enough good things about how amazing, how phenomenal the environment was, how much the universe looks like the universe in the game, how much it feels like this is a genuine post-apocalyptic city. Like, there's no aspect of it that feels like it's just too plain, or it's missing something, or it's too clean, or anything like that. So I absolutely love all of the amazing atmospheric shots that they have in this episode. But one other thing I do want to mention is I absolutely love the scene where Joel asks if this is everything that she'd hoped for, to which she obviously replies with, the jury's out, you can't deny the view, or something like that, which was obviously in the game, something that I was hoping that they keep, which they did. It was one of the most iconic lines from the game, so I'm definitely glad that they kept that in the show. When it comes to the museum, I loved every single thing about them going to the museum to them getting out. There was nothing that I didn't like when they went to the museum. I mean, obviously, it was the place that we saw the clickers, which was super cool, which I'll talk about in a bit, but everything was quite amazing from the environment that we saw. The environment of inside the building, absolutely lovely. And obviously, we saw when they got to the Capitol building, or the State House, I should say, how amazing the environment was. It was definitely super awesome to see. And like I said, there was no place where it felt like it was too clean or it didn't look realistic. The only thing, this particular scene did look a little too clean to me, like the red truck. I feel like they could have done more work on making that truck look more rusty or older. So that was one small thing that looked a little quote unquote fake to me. And I don't even know if that was CGI or if that's practical, but something that I noticed that I wanted to go through. But let's go to the museum stuff. I absolutely loved everything that we saw in the museum. Like I said, the environment that we saw outside and inside, all of that was fantastic. I absolutely loved the way that they teased the clickers even more when we were inside, the way that they showed us the body, the fresh body that was attacked by the clicker. Great way to foreshadow the clickers, especially for those who haven't played the game, who don't even know what to expect. I absolutely loved it. And I absolutely loved the way that they had Joel not only tease the clickers, but also explain to us what the clickers are, especially for non-video game players. For example, the way that they had Joel and Tess be a little freaked out when they had a feeling that there might be a clicker around. I loved that. The way that they had Joel telling Ellie to be silent, not quiet, but silent. That was great. And the way that he explained that they can't see, but they can hear, the way that they had that interaction go, I absolutely loved it. And I absolutely loved the way that they built tension when they had Ellie step on that body, the way that they made you think that something was going to happen right away, but they let it sit a little bit. Like I said, everything about the clickers before they even show up, I absolutely loved. And when they show up, it was pure perfection. I mean, the look on the clickers is amazing. We saw them in the teasers and the trailers before they even showed up, so we kind of knew what to expect, but they were super awesome. And I feel like more so than the game, they are terrifying. And the reason for that is not only because they are practical, like we are seeing them, they're not animations, but also the other part of it is seeing the characters react to these clickers the way that they did made it even more realistic and gave it more of a horror vibe. And I absolutely loved the change that they made, which is that they made Joel and Tess not having encountered and fought quite as many clickers like we saw in the game. Because when we saw Joel and Tess encounter clickers in the game like this, it wasn't quite as effective because both Joel and Tess were nonchalant about it for the most part. So just seeing the horror on their faces in the TV adaptation made it even better. And I absolutely loved that it took more to kill the clickers in the show because it just shows how violent and how destructive these things can be. And these are not even some of the more destructive monsters that we're going to meet in this story. But that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about the clickers. I mean, absolutely loved everything related to the clickers. That's the best way to say it. There was no point in the story when we saw the first interaction with the clickers where I thought that it wasn't great. Everything about it was pretty awesome. And I even liked the fact that they had the clicker by Ellie. I gotta be honest, when it first happened, I did question why was that even necessary, but they did bring it back around later in the episode, and I absolutely loved the way that they kind of worked that into the story, and in a way, it was more effective and impactful. And I'm obviously referring to the final moments of the episode where Joel, Tess, and Ellie go to the State House to hand Ellie over, where they're basically confronted with a lot of dead bodies. Now, one thing I do want to mention when it comes to the reveal about obviously Tess being bit, I thought that it was great. I mean, I loved the way that it happened in the game, and I loved the way that it happened in the TV show. It was slightly different, but I absolutely loved both versions. Neither version was better than the other. Both had their moments, both had their impact, and I absolutely loved it. The acting was amazing. The way that the actress that plays Tess, Anna Torv, reacted to seeing the bodies there and kind of feeling like she got Ellie here in vain. Absolutely loved that. Loved Pedro Pascal as Joel's reaction and his performance to seeing Tess being bit and all of that. But when it comes to the bite on Ellie's arm, I think that it was definitely effective because in the game, obviously, Ellie was just bit once. So this scene with Tess saying, "You see this bite," compares her bite to Ellie's bite, didn't quite work the same way in the video game, and it was less impactful because obviously the two bites are not going to be the same. One is 3 weeks old, one is 20 minutes old. I obviously know that even 3 weeks is 3 weeks, but I'm just saying that visually it was more impactful seeing two more fresh bites, comparing the two of them, than two bites that are longer apart. So I definitely loved the way that they had that go in the TV show compared to the video game. It was better in the show because it was more effective and it got the point across even better. Now, one comment I do have about Ellie's Bite, and this has nothing to do with the second bite, just the bite in general. There was one scene I forgot to mention at the beginning with Tess asking Ellie why she's important to Marlene and kind of questioning her. I thought that was overkill. I mean, you saw the bite, you can put the pieces together. It felt like doing that scene twice with her asking, "Why are you important to Marlene?" knowing that the bite is there was a little too much. I mean, it felt like that wasn't necessary. So that was something that I didn't really like quite as much. But let's talk about the thing that everyone wants to talk about. Let's talk about the final moments with Tess's death. Now, obviously, comparing it to the game, it happened differently in the game, and quite honestly, I like the game version better, even though Tess went out more of a badass and more of a hero in the TV adaptation. I feel like the game version was more impactful, even though we didn't really see her die on screen. Now, the reason for that is simple. I mean, I know a lot of people had a problem with the kiss of death, let's just call it, and I'm on the same boat. But I feel like a few adjustments would have made that not be as clunky. One of these things is I feel like the stalker, by the way, loved the stalker. It was amazing. Not a fan of the tendrils, like I said, but the stalker was amazing. But I think if they had the stalker attacking Tess be more violent and more jumping around and not quite as calm, it would have worked a little better. Like, I understand that the way that in the TV show they infect you is through the mouth, so it makes sense that that's the way they do it, but it was way too calm. It was way too romantic, which didn't really fit. It doesn't make sense for the stalker or the infected to be behaving the way it was behaving. On the flip side, also, it didn't make sense for Tess to be quite as calm, to freeze like that. It didn't really fit. It didn't make sense. You would think that she would fight it a lot more than she did. You know what I mean? Like, I get that she was trying to light the thing on fire and that wasn't working, so maybe she froze, but I feel like she would have done a bit more to fight the thing attacking her than just stand there. Loved the reaction on her face though, like the actress that plays Anna Torv. Loved this particular scene, the way that her eyes were frozen. Loved that, but I feel like this would have been more effective and impactful if you had a thing where she was fighting it and at one point she accepts her fate and then you have her be calm and everything. I feel like that would have been more impactful and more effective than the way that they did. But like I said, in the TV show, they had her go out with a bang, literally, and they had her go out like a hero, which I think was cool, but I feel like the video game version was a lot better because in the video game there was a lot of back and forth with Tess and the Fedra that were there. She was fighting the Fedra, she was shooting at the Fedra, and she was trying to distract the Fedra soldiers from being able to capture Joel and Ellie, something that we obviously didn't see. The Fedra weren't even there. And there was a lot of pretty awesome scenes with Joel and Ellie sneaking around and trying to avoid the Fedra soldiers, as well as some of the infected that were there. Something that they skipped over, they didn't do in the TV adaptation, which I thought was a missed opportunity. But I loved the way that the episode ended. It was the perfect ending in a way to that episode, visually, and also how it foreshadows what's to come later, with Joel walking away and with Ellie kind of standing there by herself, not really knowing if this thing is going to work with the two of them. Uneasy now because she doesn't know how this thing is going to turn out with Joel. So I absolutely loved the way that this episode ended. It was the perfect ending, in my opinion. Now, with that said, let's talk a little bit about something that is an addition to the TV show, something that didn't exist in the video game. And I'm obviously referring to how they have in the TV show the infected being able to communicate through the things that are underground and all of that. I feel like this is alien to the story. This doesn't look like a Last of Us story to me. It was awesome, and I loved how this connected back to what Tess said. So what Tess basically described was the thing that killed her. I loved that, but at the same time, I don't like the way that the infected are able to communicate. It doesn't make quite as much sense to me. Like, it feels like with the rules that they have in place, this doesn't really fit. You know what I mean? And I'm obviously talking about the rules of the universe, not the rules of the TV show, the rules that they set up in the game. So, something that I'm not a huge fan of. Same with the tendrils. I think both of these two things are things that I'm disappointed in the TV adaptation. But outside of that, I've been more or less enjoying everything that they've been changing in the TV show. But that's pretty much everything as far as my review of the episode. As far as a rating for this episode, I would have to go with a 9 out of 10. Pretty solid episode with some slight adjustments here and there and some bigger changes to the way that they have the story, like the tendrils and also the way that the infected communicate. I think that this episode could have easily been a 10. That's everything I wanted to go through. I hope you enjoyed this review. I'm intrigued to know your thoughts and opinions about the episode as well. So share it in the comment section below. But that's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.